Hey guys, welcome to Quinian's Budget Crafts. So let's go ahead and do this main gate that I've hinted at several times. We're going to put a whole bunch of lights on this one because lights are cool and Zero's Hobbies gave me the idea. I picked up this thing here from the dollar store because it has red, green, and yellow on it, but it's kind of a piece of crap, so maybe don't buy it. Moving on. I'm also going to use this flashlight I got from the dollar store. It's got some interesting parts in it. There's a triple pack for AAA batteries, and it's got this little board here that has the lights on it. All I really did was take the lights off the board and extend the length of wire. If you are super good at soldering and know how to do breadboards and capacitors and all that good stuff, you can do that without having to cannibalize a light. But I also took the switch from it because that's pretty cool too. And I'll be using one of these Firefly Light strand things as well. Just ignore that coin cell battery there, that turned out to not be enough power. And I made a power box because I couldn't figure out how to hide the electronics and stuff, so rather than hide them, just make it part of the build. It's literally just a box, but if you guys want to see how that works, let me know and I'll do a video on how to make one of these. Huge thanks to Blue Street Customs for telling me how to solder these things up. I am actually not going to film that though because I looked like a bad man making bad things with the soldering iron, but this was the end result here. I ended up using 3 of those little switches and then the one switch from the flashlight. That way all 3 of the different light sources have their own switch, and then there's a master switch for all of it. All the fancy looking wiring, all that really is there's a switch in between the positive and the power source. It's really super simple. If you guys want a video on that, I can do it, but I figured I'd just go ahead and skip it for this one. And like I said, that coin cell battery was not enough power for all of this stuff because the Firefly light runs on 2 AA's. The other one that is supposed to be the stoplight runs off of 2 AA's, and the original one from the flashlight is 3 AA's. So yeah, I need a minimum of 3 AA's to actually run all this stuff. So I'm just using that AAA battery pack out of the flashlight. And so you got your master switch here, and your individual switches to turn off each thing depending on what you do or don't want to have on. As for the soldering iron used here, you don't need expensive stuff. You can buy one like this from Amazon that is most definitely a fire hazard, but it does do what it's supposed to do. Just make sure you unplug it when you're done. Alright, so for the first set of lights that we're going to dress up here, we're going to use these pins. I'm going to do some studio lights, like the big ones that shine down on the cars. You can buy a set of these jot pins from the dollar store. There's a bunch of them in there for $1, so if you mess them up, it doesn't really matter. And these just happen to be the exact perfect size to fit one of these lights in. As for cutting these, I'm going to go ahead and use my little mini chop saw because this thing is super handy. The plastic of these pins is extremely fragile, so if you're going to cut it with a hand saw or something, you're going to have to go real slow, or maybe use like a Dremel cutoff wheel. As for the length of each of these little things that the light's going to be in, I just stuck a light in there to see where the connection ends, just so I can cover that up, and that'll be fine. So I'm going to take these outside and spray the inside with this metallic silver, and then I will clog up the ends and spray the outside with gloss black. I also got to thinking I'm going to need something to hide that battery pack in, and one of these empty paint bottles is about the perfect size, and you can kind of disguise it as a fuel tank, and that should work. So while I'm at it, I'll go ahead and spray that with my bright glossy red stuff here. So I just got to figure out where to put this power box. About there looks pretty good. We got room behind it for the battery pack. It looked a little strange and exposed, so I decided it needed a fence around it. For a chain link fence, I'm going to use a business card holder from the dollar store. These are super easy to bend and maybe not that easy to cut, but not impossible. If you have a mini anvil and a mini hammer, it makes it much easier to go ahead and flatten it out. Figure out about how tall you're going to want your fence to be and go ahead and trim it off there. You could of course bend the edge out to have the little barbed wires and whatever other kind of toppers you want. If you are doing barbed wire though, keep in mind that it bends towards the person you don't want coming in. So if you want to protect whatever's inside the fence, the barbed wire points out. But go ahead and figure out whatever it is you're going to do there and trim it if you need to. A pair of mini clippers works pretty good to get in between each of these little links. Then figure out where your bend is going to be. An easy way to bend this stuff is to just kind of crimp it with some wire cutters, and then it'll bend pretty easily right where you crimped it. You go ahead and put a nice sharp bend in there, and then realize that you measured it upside down and now the bottom of the fence is on the top. No problem, that hammers out and you can just bend it where it's supposed to be bent. My base here is just XPS foam, so I'm just going to mash it into the foam and then hot glue it in place. I also had to move this pallet here out of the way, but that's fine. I just put some glue on it and stick it back down. If there's any exposed foam, that'll get painted over when we go back over and do the grime stuff. With the power box, I just mashed the legs down into the foam to make an indent and then melted a little hole with the tip of the glue gun, just so I have somewhere to put the blob of glue without it squirting out around the feet. Then you just squirt a blob of glue in the hole that you made and stick the box in there. So I did leave these wires long on purpose, that way I could just sort of snake them around whatever I wanted to. They ended up being way too long and I had to trim them, but for now we'll just go ahead and kind of put them more or less where they're supposed to be. For my little fuel can here that I'm using to hide the battery pack, just melted a hole through the bottom of it with the glue gun there to go ahead and run the wires up through, and then hot glue that down in place. You may need to put a little trench in your foam for the wires to go from the box to underneath this thing, but I figured just smashing it would work, and this seemed to work just fine. As for the connections between the battery pack and the wires, I just pulled the batteries out of the pack and soldered the wires directly to the ends. Definitely do not do that with the batteries in there because it's going to get hot. And we're going to need a way to get this thing out of the container, so I just tied a string around it. That way we can put the string on the lid and we'll be able to fish it out that way. For the lid, I just used the rim from the top of the flashlight, painted that red too. It's a little bit big. I'll end up replacing it at some point with something that fits better, but it's what I had on hand, so I'm going to go with that. There we go, it's all working. So I noticed that studio lights have 4 fin things on them, I guess, to direct the light. In order to make those, I'm just going to glue these to a piece of plastic and I'll cut the fins out of the plastic. This plastic is some kind of really hard, semi-fragile, like blister pack stuff. So I just drilled a hole through the middle where the light's going to be, and then I'm using model cement to glue these to the plastic thing because it actually like melts the plastics together. You could probably get away with super glue, but the bond is not going to be quite as strong. So to cut out your fins, just score the plastic and break it off, really. You might end up breaking one of your fins. If you do, it's okay, you can glue it back on. And then very gently bend them all ever so slightly forward. Doesn't have to be a whole lot, just a little bit. That will make a slight separation between the fin and the housing or whatever. So a little bit of glue with some baking soda will create a pretty believable weld line. As for mounts on these things, I'm going to use some shish kebab sticks. This is very hard plastic, it's not straw or foam or whatever, so you're not going to be able to just poke a hole through it, you're going to have to actually drill that out. You could also melt the hole through it, but either way, be very careful and do not hold it with your fingers because it's really small and it's way too easy to slip and either drill a hole through or burn your own finger. Whatever method you go with, once you get your holes, you can go ahead and put the skewer in the hole and glue it in place. Now take a bit of cotton ball or sponge or pretty much anything soft that you can cram in there and plug the hole so that you don't ruin the silver on the inside. Now you can take these out and spray paint them in gloss black or use craft paint or whatever your method is. I like spray paint, it's super simple, super easy. And this color place spray paint is $1 a can, so can't really go wrong with that. Once you got them all painted, you can go ahead and poke the cotton ball right out the other side. And you got some pretty decent studio light housings. I ended up bending mine forward on the stick because I realized that they weren't going to work that way. Pointing straight ahead didn't really make a whole lot of sense. I just had to repaint a little bit where the stick was showing after tilting them. So now go ahead and figure out where you want them to be and how exactly you're going to do that. I'm taking the shortcut here and just hot gluing them on. Once you've got all that mounted, you can go through with that string of little Firefly Lights. You can get those at the dollar store. They pretty much always only ever come in white, but you can get them in other colors sometimes, depending on the time of year. They're pretty good for putting behind other things to light them up or to make it look like a marquee sign or something like that. Weaving these in behind the Gaslands sign was a task. I probably should have glued them to the sign before putting the sign on the gate, but yeah, whatever. Also, that sign is Granny Grate with a printout glued to it with the holes poked through, which is about as simple as it sounds, but if you want me to show you how to do that, I can do that. Just let me know in the comments. But with the lights behind it, it's looking pretty good. Looks like a couple letters burnt out or something, which was not intentional, but it actually really works for this build. Then I went ahead and shortened the studio light wires just a little bit and snaked them through all that framework, and then just hot glue them directly into the back of the housing. And with anything electric, you probably want to give it several checks as you go. So all the switches are still working, and if we turn the lights off, it's starting to look pretty good. So for the traffic light section, you need those little hoods that go over each light. I'm going to use more pins for that, but they're not just straight rectangles, they actually have like a little bit of a shape to them. So in order to get that shape, all I've done is put a Dremel bit into a drill because it's way slower than a Dremel, and then just run the corners of the light on that to round them over. This obviously could be done with the Dremel, but the Dremel's really fast, even variable speed ones, so I didn't want to melt the plastic, I just want to grind off those corners. For the stoplight housing itself, I'm just using a little bit of Ready Board from the dollar store. I ended up changing this several times, but essentially just figure out where you want your lights to be and cut the foam out around it. Started to make a little box here, ended up changing my mind later, that's not important. Push your little hood things into the foam so you can see where they're going to go, and then melt a hole through it so that the lights can get through. And then you can glue the little hoods into the foam. So I did use crazy glue here to attach these to the foam. The crazy glue will melt the foam, but not that much as long as you don't get too heavy-handed with it. And we're going to be hot gluing behind this anyway, so. Alright, so here's the reason for the delay. I had to order some lights because that stupid thing I got from the dollar store, all those lights ended up breaking. I actually ended up replacing every single one of them. But now we've got a bunch of lights. So now go ahead and coat your foam and the little hoods and everything in some Mod Podge and black to seal up the foam, and then you can spray paint it. I've changed these lights out several times, and for some reason the red one keeps dying. I don't know why. The only thing I can figure is that the Gasland gods are like, there's no stopping in Gaslands, so you don't get a red light. So, alright, fine, we'll just roll with no red light. I also made up a bit more of this corrugated metal stuff. I'm going to use that to wrap around where the lights go. That'll hide that bundle of electronics and breadboard and stuff in the back. So we'll just feed those lights through the framework and then hot glue them into the housing. Figure out about how big of a sheet of corrugated metal you're going to need to convincingly wrap around this. And go ahead and cut that out. And you'll need to cut out a little chunk for the wires and all the stuff behind this plate. Then you can just glue that directly to the back of this plate thing you made. And then glue that whole thing directly to the framework. Depending on how Mad Max you're going with this, you could actually leave it at just the one. I decided I wanted to actually wrap up the whole thing, so I just did a few more pieces of metal all the way around. And then we can go through and weather it. I've already painted up most of this gate. If you wanted to see how the gates are done, I have another video on the gates. For the rust weathering on this, I like to start with a little bit of brown, and then I go in with some barn red, and use a sponge for that. And then after I've applied the paints with a sponge, I'll water down what paint is on my tray, and then use a brush to make it kind of squeak and run. Don't forget your fence. And I wanted that burnt out red light to still be obviously red, so we'll just go ahead and paint that up with some of this cardinal crimson. It almost gives the effect of glowing, at least in this light. Alright, so let's go ahead and check it out. I had to mess with the camera settings here because cameras and light don't like to cooperate, but we'll see if we can get this to work out. Go ahead and double check all the individual switches, make sure that they actually work. I know that the master switch is working because it's all on. So there you go, a lit up main gate with the game's name on it, so you know, no question about what you're playing. Looks pretty good from all sides. Of course, if you want to see how the gate's done, or the barrels, or the crates, or any of the rest of that stuff, there's videos on that. Except for the main sign and the box itself. If you guys want to see how those were done, I can do separate videos on those for you. And I realized that those studio lights were way too new looking. They needed some rust and stuff. But there you go. Of course, as always, thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one.